We need to find a way to get in good trouble, necessary trouble, if we're going to save America.
This is Paige. Welcome to the Necessary Trouble Show. Here's your host, my dad, Russell Fugett.
Thanks so much, Paige. Welcome back to the Necessary Trouble Show here in the Good Word Digital Studios. I'm really excited to have my good friend, another George Washington University alum, Lyndon Pryor, join us. Lyndon Pryor is the head of engagement at the Louisville Urban League. And of course, there's so much going on the ground there. As many of you have heard in the news just last week, Breonna Taylor's family received a $12 million settlement from the city of Louisville. Lyndon, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Russ. I really appreciate it. Good to be on with you.
So just real open-ended question to get started. Where exactly are we in the quest and the work for justice for Breonna Taylor on the ground in Louisville?
Well, as you mentioned, the city reached a settlement with the family, and that's a huge deal. I mean, it was an unprecedented settlement amount, the most that the city has paid out thus far. But I think for us, and we at the league, along with the National Urban League, released a statement shortly after, highlighting the fact that one of the things that the family did, which is also pretty unprecedented, was they pushed for police reforms as part of that settlement package. And so they agreed with the city on about 12 different things that the Louisville Metro Police Department needed to implement in terms of policy and practice moving forward. And so that is a really big deal. Had really any number of those things been in place back in March, Breonna would probably still be here with us. And so it's pretty significant to think that they weren't just thinking about, what might be owed them financially via this civil suit, but how can they make an impact so that no other family has to endure the same type of trauma and tragedy that they've had to do. So that's the civil case. What's going to be happening in terms of the criminal case. So that is now with the AG, Daniel Cameron, the state attorney general right now is still deliberating or preparing to release his findings and what it is that he's going to do. And so we are awaiting justice there. We believe that the officers should be indicted and arrested and charged in this case and stand trial. Two of the officers who were directly involved in the shooting still have not been fired. So that's on the mayor. The mayor has the power and authority to do that. And he is yet to do that. And so that could have happened a while ago at any point in time. But really the big thing is for the attorney general to release his decision on what he's going to do with regard to those officers and maybe others regarding this case.
Do we have any sense from the Attorney General as to timing, as to if there's anything forthcoming? Of course, we saw a few weeks ago that Attorney General Cameron, I believe it was, met with the family of Breonna Taylor, and it wasn't really clear to me if anything of substance resulted from that meeting. Is there anything imminent or coming that we can look forward to in the coming weeks?
So we're hoping that it will be any day now. To be honest, we at one point were getting signs that this was going to happen before Labor Day. They were for a long time waiting on some results, some investigative results from the FBI and from others. And they got those prior to Labor Day. And so we thought it would be a pretty quick process from that point moving forward. But it has kind of dragged on a little bit. So it honestly could be any day now. We're hoping that it will be any day now. This justice delayed, again, which is far too often the case for Black people. We have to wait these extended periods of time just to hear anything. And that's just truly unfortunate, but we are really hoping that any day now we'll get a decision.
Well, that's great news because we all know that justice delayed is certainly justice denied. I know one thing that we've discussed over the summer, Lyndon, in our communication is the desire for you and the Urban League to want to keep the peace, and why we want to keep pushing we want to keep the peace. I know there's been conversation about more protests coming up in the coming weeks. How are things getting on the ground in that regard? Are there protests in the works to continue to push the issue? And what's the status in terms of being able to keep the peace in Louisville while we keep pushing at the same time?
Well, one thing that's, I have to make sure I say is that there are, in terms of protests, there are all sorts of groups who are engaged in protests, right? Like this is not one monolithic thing. And so there are lots of different organizations and small groups and gatherings and really even individuals who are out there on the streets protesting for justice. And our sense is that those are going to continue until this case comes to a justified resolution. And so I don't think that those are going to stop anytime soon. There's been a group that has been out in front of the mayor's office now for well over 100 days, and they are not moving until this case comes to its final resolution. And so the protests are going to continue. We are going to always push for peaceful protests, which they have been by and large. And that's one of those things, if I can just address that, like folks have said in the news, and even some of the people here on the government side of things have thrown out words like rioting and looting. And for those of us who are old enough to remember LA after Rodney King, for those of us who remember Ferguson, for those of us who were just paying attention to what was happening up in Kenosha, like nothing that has happened in Louisville even comes close to comparing what has happened in other places, right? And so to throw around these inflammatory words like rioting and looting and those types of things is just, again, it's those same dog whistles that we're used to hearing. It's the things that are used by those who oppose justice to be able to get folks on their side and to think less of those who are out here demonstrating and pushing, quite frankly, just for humanity and dignity for Black people. And so we really have to stop that. We really have to watch the words that we use, and we have to check people when they do it, because what we've seen here in Louisville is not at all on the scale of what I would call rioting, looting. We have certainly had some folks who have been bad actors, particularly early on, and folks who have done some damage and some harm. And most of those people, as far as we can tell, aren't even from Louisville. They were folks from the outside who came in to agitate. But even with those folks, what was done, the damage, whatnot, not close to the scale of what we've seen when cities truly go up in flames. And so we just have to be careful about that.
Now, pivoting subjects a little bit, of course, we have an election coming up, and we're here at the Necessary Trouble Show in the spirit of John Lewis and voting. And I know to many, voting seems like a very insignificant or insufficient thing to do as we think about the murdering of Black and brown bodies by police or armed citizens unjustly. We obviously, everybody's paying attention in many ways, those of us who are locked into the Senate race in the state. But what's happening a little bit on the ground in two prongs? What's happening on the ground in terms of down ballot races? Is there anything that can impact the work that's taking place around police reform in the state or in Louisville specifically? And then what's the Urban League doing to get out the vote as we head towards Election Day?
Right. So there are lots of local elections, and particularly here in Louisville, it's kind of an interesting thing. A lot of those elections down ballot were actually decided in the primary just because there's no opponents on certain sides. And so there will be, for some of the smaller districts around the city, there may be some contested races locally in the general or in November, but a lot of those things have been decided and some changes have been made. The election cycle for Kentucky is a little off. A lot of stuff happens a little earlier. Our governor's races and things like that tend to fall on off years. So those things, many of those things have been decided, but there are still some contested elections that we'll be watching closely. I mean, and namely, obviously, the Senate majority or the Senate race, Mitch McConnell's race against Amy McGrath will be really important there. For the Urban League's part, we are a nonpartisan organization, but we are pushing folks to get out and vote. And so right now we are helping to register as many voters as we can. We are particularly interested in 170,000 individuals who, under the new governor, received their right to vote. They had their rights restored. And so we are reaching out to many of those individuals to make sure that they know that their rights have been restored, and then to help them get registered so that they can exercise their power in the upcoming election. Beyond that, we are preparing for just kind of these COVID elections, and we got a taste of that in June when we had our primary. But with all the changes to polling locations and being able to vote by mail, we are doing everything we can to make sure that people know how the process works, how they can request their ballots, when early voting starts. And then beyond that, we're going to do what we can to help get people to the polls. And so we are encouraging early voting. We don't want anybody waiting till November 3rd to cast their vote. Excuse me. We want folks to go early and get their ballot cast, whether they're doing it in person or whether they're submitting it by mail. But we are coordinating with partners and friends all around the city and really all around the state. And even from outside the state, actually. But Black Voters Matter out of Atlanta is giving us a lot of help and support to really turn out the vote for this election, because one thing we know, and John Lewis was a great example of this, is that the vote is our voice, right? It is not our only voice, but it is a major component, and we have to exercise that responsibly and do what we can to get those in power who are going to be responsive to our needs. And so when we think about Breonna and what has happened to her and her family and so many others, we have to do our best to make sure that we're going to have folks in office who are responsive to the needs of Black people and Black communities.
Excellent. Well, Lyndon, thank you so much for all the work you're doing and for your whole team there at the Urban League in Louisville. And we're going to keep pushing. That's Lyndon Pryor, the Chief Engagement Officer of the Louisville, Kentucky chapter of the Urban League. Lyndon, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and good luck with this, man. I'm glad to see you all doing such great work.
Thank you. Appreciate you, brother. Welcome back to the Necessary Trouble Show here at the Good Word Digital Studios. Honored to be joined by my good friend, Danny Torres. Danny is a longtime sports journalist and also an educator, and also the host of the soon-to-be launching Talkin 21 podcast. And 21, if you want to know, or didn't know, is talking about the Hall of Famer, one of the all-time baseball greats, the late Roberto Clemente. Danny, thanks for joining us today.
Well, Russ, I was surprised when I received the email and the text message that you wanted me to be a guest on your show, but I guess I must be high on the totem pole of who do I want to have on my show, and I'm honored and humbled that you provided me this opportunity. And thank you to Crystal for those beautifully well-written emails and keeping me updated. And once again, I just thank you for the invitation.
Well, Crystal Warner not only keeps all of the trains running on time, she also keeps them on track here as our producer of the Necessary Trouble Show. So kudos to her, and fellow Puerto Rican as well, by the way. I don't know if I told you that off camera, but nonetheless, we're grateful to have Crystal a part of this team.
So what you're telling me right now, Russ, we have to do it bilingual. So si entonces tú quieres que yo hable español, yo puedo decir todo en español ahora mismo. Tú me dices eso ahora, yo hablo español con Crystal. Y yo sé que tú entendiste todo eso. Tú entendiste todo eso.
I was a C student in Spanish in high school and college. I took 3 years, and that was a long time ago.
How about I tell you I was B+?
Okay, well, it sounded A+ as far as my ear could tell. Let me tell you.
I like that.
So, Danny, you recently were in Pittsburgh for the celebration of the Roberto Clemente Day, which this year, as you reminded me, leading up to this was September 9th this year. And of course, in an MLB situation where there's no fans in attendance and we're in COVID, I was happy you were able to go there safely and be a part of that. Tell us a little bit about the Roberto Clemente celebration, this year, especially in the midst and the light of the social justice movement that we're seeing now here in the States?
Well, Russ, immediately when I had heard the news that Pirates manager Derek Shelton, Joey Cora, a longtime coach of the Pittsburgh Pirates, and the Clemente family, specifically Roberto Jr. and Luis Roberto Clemente and his brother Enrique, they really, really put together a fine tribute to a Pittsburgh Pirate great, but certainly a father, a husband, a grandfather, dedicated to one of the most extraordinary, phenomenal ball players that have ever graced a baseball field. And for me to know that the Pittsburgh Pirate team was going to wear the number 21, I said to myself, there's no way. That day, which interesting enough was my mother's 88th birthday, which interesting enough, at 8:45, when I was at LaGuardia, I received the phone call from my daughter, who lives in Ohio, about an hour and 20 minutes away, that I was going to help kind of knock out two birds with one stone and help her pack, because she'll be wrapping up her rotations where she's currently at in Niles, Ohio, and she'll be in Akron in the coming months. And I was going to help her pack before school officially commenced that coming Monday. But she's crying on the phone. And I'm wondering, at 8:45, 15 minutes about before the board that flight to Pittsburgh, why she's crying. So immediately my heart fell. It comes to find out that she said to me, "Papi, I passed step 2. And for every future doctor has to go through these exams, these licensing exams. It's called the United States Medical Licensing Exam, USMLE, step 2. And she passed, not barely, but a very nice score. And that was a huge, huge relief. So here it is. I'm about to board the plane to Pittsburgh, and knowing on the plane that I got a huge smile on my face, that my beautiful daughter, who I'm so proud of both my daughters. Talia's the medical student. Sierra is a 3D artist in New York City. Very proud of both girls. And certainly to get that news, which for every medical student, you're on pins and needles. And to have been there in Pittsburgh, to officially kick off Talkin 21 podcast, to have heard the news that my daughter passed that exam, I just think maybe Roberto was looking down on me and saying, you know, Danny, you're a pretty good guy. And I see you want to kick off this podcast in my former home when I was on the planet Earth. And now looking at everything from above, you know, all the signs were there. The 21 signs were there. And I was just honored to be one of the lucky 35 media members inside PNC Park in the press box, and getting an opportunity to see for the first time since 1972, the entire Pirate team walking out to their respective spots. A video tribute that Luis Clemente put together dedicated to his mother, a moment of silence dedicated to his mother, who passed away in November of 2019. I was honored to have been at her funeral, one of the few that were there for the private wake before the public memorial, there in the Roberto Clemente Coliseum in Puerto Rico. And just so many different signs of the hours that I was there. I got a chance to drive where he used to live in his own neighborhood. And again, you know, Russ, it was for me, honestly, the word, and we've heard this and we've used this word often, it was surreal. You know, that, oh, and I even forgot to mention this. I'm shooting the video to kick off in front of the Roberto Clemente bronze statue. What are the chances, Russ, that as I'm looking straight ahead, I'm looking at someone that's right where the entrance or one of the side entrances to the ballpark, and the person's back was turned to me while I'm facing the statue to kick off a video to announce the podcast. And the gentleman turns around. Russ, what are the chances that would be Roberto Clemente Jr. with his wife? Well, meaning I just within 2 hours just left, was picked up from the airport, get to PNC Park, and he was there. He was on the phone, so his back was turned to me. And the first thing is, I actually said, Russ, truthfully, I said, man, that guy from the back looks like Doc Ellis. Well, Doc Ellis passed away in 2008. He was Roberto's teammate. And when he turns around with a mask, and it was a 21 mask, I'm like, are you kidding me? But he would be here. And within 10 minutes, Russ, the Pirate manager, Joey Cora, Derek Shelton, they're coming out. And they were doing a photo op in front of the statue with Roberto Jr. So I guess that's the reason why he was there. So here it is. I'm there to kick off the podcast. So I get Roberto Jr., I get Derek Shelton, Joey Cora, and 6 or 7 other players. Again, all the signs were there that I looked up above and I said, you know, Roberto, I've been following you now for a number of years, and if this is a sign, I thank you for that because I think you know what's in my heart.
Well, when these stadiums go open back up, I encourage anybody who's listening to go to PNC Park. It's one of the most beautiful stadiums to watch a baseball game. I had a chance to go last summer, and then also to go see the Roberto Clemente statue at the stadium. And you're by the water there, Three Rivers. It's really an amazing sight to see. And as a girl dad, I can feel your sense of pride having 2 young daughters. Myself, I can only imagine that week must have been so special for you. Why was this the first time that since 1972 that Pittsburgh Pirates all wore 21 on Clemente Day? Why was this year the year that happened for the first time in almost 50 years?
Well, I think part of it is, Rush, you're aware of this, and everyone's fully aware, especially if you're baseball aficionados. The only number that is retired throughout Major League Baseball is number 42, Jackie Robinson's number. And it's a special significance for baseball fans, especially the commissioner's office, those that decided to fully honor Jackie Robinson, rightfully so, with this number being retired. It becomes an educational moment. He broke the barrier in April of 1947. So certainly Jackie holds a very dear place in baseball history, but we've heard this often in American history. Martin Luther King always said, if it wasn't because of Jackie, I wouldn't have been able to do what I did and really combating everything for the Black American. But I also think, and I mentioned this to Crystal when I sent the Google form, of the struggles of the Afro-Latino, the Black Latin, the player like Roberto Clemente, who said, I'm Black, I'm Puerto Rican. They didn't say I'm Puerto Rican and Black. He said, I'm Black and Puerto Rican, because when you see someone that's dark, you're not looking to say, well, is he Afro-American or is he someone from Latin America? You're simply seeing a Black man. So Roberto understood the struggle. He obviously understood Jackie Robinson's struggle. Hey, we could talk about the Negro Leagues if we want to even touch on that. But 1947, the barrier is broken. As they say, the rest is history. But that number is the only number that's retired. Now, the Pittsburgh Pirates retired the number in 1973, April of 73. So no one has worn the number 21 on the field with the exception of the boys. Mrs. Clemente would always put on a 21 jersey, but never, ever since beginning of the 73 season, no one's ever worn 21 during an actual game. So it was huge, huge that here it is, the manager, the coaching staff, the players, and also, Russ, Puerto Rican players throughout the league were allowed to wear 21, but also if a player requested to wear 21 by their team, and maybe also, I believe, spoke with the Players Association. So in case, an example of Neil Walker, whose father, Tom Walker, actually knew Roberto Clemente. Tom Walker's dad played in the Puerto Rican Winter League, and there is a connection there with Roberto. So Neil had the opportunity to wear for the Philadelphia Phillies, wear number 21, but there also were 21 patches that were created for not only the Puerto Rican players, but Latin American players that wanted to wear 21, pay tribute to Roberto, rightfully so. So hopefully this is a first step to say to Major League Baseball, it's time to retire number 21 for everything he stood for. But most importantly, let's be honest. How did the man die on December 31st, 1972? All I know is for 38 years, those that I've had an opportunity to interview had always said, Roberto always talked about that he was not going to live a long life. He even told his wife that, and she said, don't say that, Roberto. And look what ends up happening, sadly, on a humanitarian mission to Nicaragua. And I think that's the reason why your Latin players, specifically Puerto Rican players, your Latin American players, your Black players, your Caucasian players, but everybody who knows the message of Roberto Clemente that's why they want to honor him by seeing number 21 retired.
That's a powerful history lesson you're giving us here on the Necessary Trouble Show. And I just know that we can't know where we're going until we know where we've been.
Yeah.
And so understanding that history and his role as a humanitarian, of course, he was one of the best outfielders of all time, one of the best baseball players of all time. He was also one of the most amazing people of the 20th century and of all time. And so to know that history and to know why he lived and why and how he died is critical, particularly in this moment. I know you recently wrote an article about AAA manager in the Padres system, Edwin Rodriguez, I believe it was.
Yes,
Tell me a little
Edwin
bit about his
Rodriguez.
story.
Well,
Mhm.
you know, it's amazing, Russ, and I think that's why you and I, when we met 10 years ago at the museum that is dedicated to your uncle, Reginald Lewis, who it's a fascinating story for those that have never, ever have heard who Reginald Lewis was. It truly is, I mean, for me, he's a trailblazer in so many different ways. But we met, it was a traveling exhibition by the Smithsonian Institution. And that's how we met by chance. You approached me, we began to speak, exchanged phone numbers, and we always kept in contact. Anytime that I would be in the Baltimore area, I would send you a text message. You got a chance to meet Sean Gibson, the great grandson of Josh Gibson, to see the Roberto Clemente off-Broadway show there, as well in Washington, D.C. I believe that's where we ended up seeing that production. But Edwin and I go back about 10 years. Edwin is in the San Diego Padres organization. He is the manager of the AAA Padres there in El Paso, Texas. And I just was really so impressed that although the minor league system had to shut down due to COVID, Edwin did not waste any time because he knew his players were not going to be playing this year. So the quick thinking Edwin Rodriguez, a dear friend of mine of over 10 years, who's also the manager of Team Puerto Rico in the World Baseball Classic, which was the last one was in 2017. And you know, it was called Team Rubio. You know, Rubio, it means blonde in Spanish. And all the team players dyed their hair blonde, and they went on a nice streak. But let's be honest, it was your boy, Mr. Adam Jones, with that unbelievable catch for Team USA. And Crystal, I don't know if she got a chance to see it, but there's highlight reels on that where he leaped up and just grabbed the ball. And listen, we all know how great Adam Jones is.
From San Diego Padre, Manny Machado.
There you go. Hey, look at the connection. Look at the connection there.
Yeah, right.
So Edwin came up with this idea of having these webinars where he actually invited former players that played on the World Baseball Classic Team Puerto Rico team from 2017, Carlos Delgado, Hall of Famer Ivan Pudge Rodriguez, Carlos Beltran, Alex Cora, Omar Vizquel. It was a who's who, Carlos Baerga, even players that, even that there was I believe, a sports psychologist, because Edwin wanted this to be an educational forum where he could pretty much say, all right, guys, whether it's Russ or whether it's Danny, unfortunately, the season has stopped. So guess what, Russ? Guess what, Danny? What are you going to do throughout all of this, during this pandemic? Are you just basically going to give up and say, there goes my career? No, this is what I think you need to do. And what he did was provide a platform where created these webinars where players were able to sign in totally for free and learn the art of hitting from Carlos Delgado, learn the art of catching from Pudge Rodriguez, learn the art of whatever that specialty was of that particular guest that was on that particular webinar. And it lasted for sometimes an hour, sometimes it went, I believe, close to 2 hours. So Edwin did this simply to say, okay, I'm still doing these Zoom meetings with the Padres, with my coaches, and even communicating with his players. But what can I do where I could tell my players, I want you to listen into this? So it's get your pen and paper, sit back, and start writing your notes as to how these players approached it, how these players said, when I was injured, this is what I did. How these players said, when I face adversity, this is what I did. So if the adversity right now is the pandemic, what are you going to do? okay, right now we're hoping baseball for the minor leagues is up and running in 2021. So now the question is, what are you doing right now during the course of this temporary pause in minor league baseball? So I have to give the utmost kudos and applause to Edwin Rodriguez. And I just thought it was a great story to tell of one of his players, Austin Allen, who is with the Oakland Athletics now. I believe he's on a 40-man roster, but he was playing early, I did notice, at the course of this shortened season. But I got a chance to communicate with Carlos Delgado, former Met, All-Star, Blue Jay great, who just pretty much told me, listen, I just thought this was a phenomenal idea by Edwin, and I wanted to be a part of it. And Edwin told me a lot of the guys just jumped on board. So what Austin said, here is someone that's not Latin, but what Edwin meant to him when he was a part of the AAA team of the San Diego Padres. He was traded to the A's, but when he was there with Edwin, how influential, how impactful Edwin was as a manager. And Austin said to me point blank, Danny, I'll always look to Edwin to confide in him because he believed in me. And let's be honest, Russ, it's good that someone is able to believe in you to do what you're doing, someone to believe in me with what I'm doing. And like, I'm able to at least say, yes, I know I'm impacting lives as an educator. I'm also impacting someone that read my story. You read it. And someone to say to me on Twitter or a direct message, hey, Danny, man, you really hit all the right points in that story. And at the end of the day, that's what I love about writing. And that's why I told Krista earlier, I'm immediately looking at an email and I'm starting to see, okay, where's the typo here? And, it's beautifully written. So, I'm waiting for Krista to put something together and send it out so that she could tag me on Twitter and we could let others know how great of a writer she is.
Well, soon you're going to have her writing blog posts on necessarytroubleshow.com to continue to highlight the work you and so many of our guests are doing in our community. So, Danny, I just want to thank you so much for being a part of this episode of the show. And
I
I'm just going
appreciate
to
it,
have
man. I really do.
tell everybody just make sure everybody subscribes to the podcast. That's Talkin 21. I know it's going to be on Apple, on Spotify in the coming days. So look out for that podcast.
I thank you,
journalist,
Russ.
educator. Thank you.
I appreciate it. And lastly, it is at Talkin 21 Podcast. It's on Twitter. It's on Instagram. And we are actually taping our first episode today, a very special guest. And you guys have to wait and see who that special guest is. But Russ, thank you so much. Crystal, you got my number. I'm looking forward to hearing back from you, and you can send me any of your stories.
We will be in touch, Danny. Thanks for being on with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it immensely and look forward to seeing once it's up on social media. And thanks for the time.
Thanks for watching The Necessary Trouble Show. Please visit necessarytroubleshow.com to support the show and to learn more. Subscribe to our e-newsletter and podcast, and follow us on social media at Necessary Trouble Show.
This is Paige. Thanks for watching.